He ruled for 67 years. He fathered over 100 children. He built more monuments than any pharaoh before or after him, and 3,000 years after his death, he was issued a passport. Occupation: king. Status: deceased. For over a century, the mummy of the most powerful pharaoh in Egyptian history sat in a glass case in Cairo, slowly being eaten alive by fungus. When scientists finally examined him, they found battle scars, arthritis, a jaw abscess that must have caused him agony, and something else entirely. Something the Egyptian authorities did not want the world to see. His hair was red, not stained by embalming chemicals, not discolored by age, naturally red, confirmed under a microscope at a criminal forensics laboratory in Paris. And that single detail, 7 strands of ginger hair on a 3,000-year-old skull, ignited a scientific and political controversy that has never been fully resolved. For over a century, Egyptologists believed they knew who this pharaoh was. DNA says otherwise. This is the story of the most powerful man who ever ruled Egypt. His body, his hair, his bones, and the secret his mummy carried for 3 millennia. Roughly 3,200 years ago, a young man took the throne of Egypt. He was barely 20 years old. His father, a military commander who had seized power and founded a new dynasty, had groomed him from childhood for the role. By 14, he held the title of Prince Regent. By 18, he was leading armies. He would rule for the next 67 years. The longest reign of any pharaoh in the New Kingdom, the era when Egypt reached its greatest power. He fought the largest chariot battle in recorded history, leading roughly 20,000 Egyptian soldiers against an alliance of kingdoms at a fortified city in what is now Syria. The battle was indecisive by any military measure. Both sides claimed victory, but the pharaoh carved his version of the story into every temple wall he could reach, turning a stalemate into a legend of personal heroism. He signed the oldest known peace treaty in history with his former enemies, a document preserved in both Egyptian hieroglyphics and Babylonian cuneiform. He built on a scale that made his predecessors look modest. The Great Hall at Karnak had a forest of columns, each taller than a 6-story building. The twin temples, carved directly into a sandstone cliff face at the southern border of his kingdom, had facades guarded by 4 seated statues of himself, each over 20 meters tall. He carved his name into so many existing monuments that later archaeologists initially believed he had built them all. He married at least 8 women. He fathered sons and daughters by the dozen. His children filled the courts and temples of Egypt for generations. When he finally died, in his early 90s, he had outlived most of his own children, most of his wives, and most of the foreign kings he had fought and negotiated with. His people had never known another ruler. An entire generation had been born, grown old, and died during his reign. He was buried in a grand tomb in the Valley of the Kings. The tomb was looted within centuries. Ancient priests trying to protect what remained moved his body at least 3 times, wrapping and re-wrapping it, recording each move in hieratic script on the linen. His mummy spent over 2,000 years being shuttled between hiding places by men who feared for the safety of a king who had been dead longer than most civilizations last. In 1881, his body was found in a hidden cache of royal mummies stuffed into a cliff tomb near the Valley of the Kings. The tomb was discovered by a local family of grave robbers who had been secretly selling artifacts from it for years. When authorities finally tracked the source, they found a narrow shaft cut into the rock face, leading to a long corridor, and at the end, a chamber packed with over 50 coffins. Kings and queens from across 5 centuries of Egyptian history lay side by side, their golden coffins stripped, their wrappings scrawled with notes by the priests who had moved them. Some had been rewrapped 3 or 4 times, each layer bearing a new date and a new hiding place. The pharaoh lay among them, his coffin modest compared to the glory of the temples he had built in life. When the wrappings were removed, the body beneath stunned the scientists. He was tall for his era, roughly 5 feet 7 inches. His jaw was strong and prominent. His nose was long and hooked, matching the statues carved during his lifetime. His hands were crossed over his chest in the traditional pose of kingship, and his hair, thin and fragile but still attached to the scalp, was a pale reddish color. No one discussed the hair, not publicly, not for nearly a century. The mummy was placed in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. For decades, it was one of the most visited objects in the collection, but it was deteriorating. The dry air of the museum was not enough to stop what was happening inside the wrappings. Fungus had taken root. 2 species of insects were feeding on the linen. 60 types of fungi and an uncounted number of bacteria were slowly consuming the remains of the most powerful pharaoh in history. By 1974, the situation was critical. Egyptian scientists determined that the mummy needed treatment that was only available in France. Specifically, it needed gamma radiation to sterilize the fungal growth. But there was a problem. French law required documentation for any individual entering the country, living or dead. The Egyptian government issued the pharaoh a passport. The photograph showed his mummified face. The occupation line read, "King deceased." The document was valid for the duration of his stay. On September 26, 1976, the mummy landed at an airport outside Paris. It was received with full military honors. A French government minister stood on the tarmac. An army detachment presented arms. A 3,000-year-old corpse was greeted as a visiting head of state. The mummy was transported to a laboratory at the National Museum, where it was examined by a team of specialists over the following months. The laboratory had been cleared and sterilized specifically for the examination. Access was restricted. Armed guards stood outside the doors. Inside, the mummy was laid on a steel table under surgical lighting. For the first time since the ancient priests had wrapped him, a modern medical team had unrestricted access to the body of the most powerful pharaoh in Egyptian history. They began with X-rays. The skeletal structure was remarkably intact. The spine showed compression fractures consistent with decades of physical strain. The hip joints were worn smooth by arthritis. The teeth, what remained of them, told a story of chronic suffering. Then they moved to the soft tissue. The skin, dried to dark leather over 3 millennia, still covered most of the body. The facial features were intact enough to compare directly with the stone portraits carved during his lifetime. The resemblance was unmistakable. The long nose, the strong jaw, the high cheekbones. The sculptors had not been flattering him, they had been recording him. And this is where the story the textbooks do not tell begins. The chief forensic scientist at the Criminal Identification Laboratory of Paris was tasked with the physical examination. He was one of the most experienced forensic pathologists in France, trained to read a human body the way a detective reads a crime scene. He measured the body, he catalogued every wound, every scar, every sign of disease. He found arthritis in the hips and spine, consistent with a man who had spent decades riding chariots and standing for ceremonies. He found a severe dental abscess in the jaw. an infection that must have caused constant, excruciating pain in the final years of life. He found healed fractures consistent with battlefield injuries sustained decades before death. And then he examined the hair. Under a microscope, the forensic scientist determined that the hair was naturally red. It was not stained by henna, which was commonly used in Egyptian cosmetics. It was not discolored by the embalming process, which would have produced a uniform darkening rather than a reddish hue. The hair contained natural red pigment at the root. He published his conclusion in formal scientific language. The pharaoh had been, according to French forensic terminology, a fair-skinned individual with wavy ginger hair. He linked this to the god associated with red-haired people in Egyptian mythology, the deity of storms and chaos, whose name the pharaoh's own father had carried. The finding was explosive. Almost nobody talked about it. The reason is political, and it is the same reason that the Y chromosome data from the boy king's mummy was suppressed for a decade, as we covered in an earlier video on this channel. Ancient Egypt occupies a unique position in modern identity politics. Multiple communities claim cultural, genetic, and spiritual descent from the pharaohs. Any scientific finding that appears to link the rulers of Egypt to one modern population over another becomes a weapon in debates that have nothing to do with archaeology and everything to do with race. Red hair and fair skin, in the context of an ancient Egyptian pharaoh, immediately invite claims from groups who want to argue that Egyptian civilization was built by people who looked like modern Europeans. These claims are rejected by mainstream science. The genetic evidence from multiple studies, including the 2017 study of mummies from a site in Middle Egypt, consistently shows that ancient Egyptians were genetically closest to Near Eastern and North African populations, not to Northern Europeans. The forensic scientist who examined the hair did not make any racial claims. He reported a physical observation. Red hair, fair skin. These traits are consistent with populations across the Near East and North Africa, where red hair occurs at low but consistent frequencies to this day. But the political sensitivity of the finding meant that it was quietly filed and rarely cited. Egyptologists who referenced the Paris examination focused on the arthritis, the height, the dental abscess. The hair was mentioned in footnotes, if at all. For over 40 years, the most famous mummy in Egypt carried a forensic secret in plain sight. 7 strands of red hair on a 3,000-year-old skull, documented in a French police laboratory, published in a scientific bulletin, and then buried under silence. The silence was not accidental. It was institutional. In the decades that followed the Paris examination, the political stakes around Egyptian royal DNA grew steadily higher. Who the pharaohs were, genetically, became a question that governments, academic departments, and entire communities invested their identities in. Any scientist who published findings that could be interpreted as linking the pharaohs to one modern group risked professional backlash, political pressure, and public attack from multiple directions simultaneously. The safer course was to study the bones, publish the arthritis data, describe the dental abscess, and leave the hair color in a footnote. For 40 years, that is exactly what happened. DNA says otherwise. The hair was there, the pigment was real, and the science was sound. But the world was not ready to hear it. In 2023, a team published a new facial reconstruction of the pharaoh in the Journal of Archaeological Science. They used computed tomography scans of the skull, combined with the forensic data from the 1976 Paris examination, to build a 3-dimensional digital model of his face at approximately age 45. The reconstruction showed a strong-jawed man with a prominent nose, deep-set eyes, and a broad forehead. The skin tone was modeled as medium olive, consistent with the genetic profiles of ancient Egyptian populations. The hair was not shown as red. The team acknowledged the Paris finding, but noted that hair pigment in mummified remains is subject to post-mortem chemical changes that make definitive conclusions difficult. They chose to reconstruct the hair as dark, citing the statistical probability for the regional population. The debate was not settled, it was sidestepped. Meanwhile, the broader question of Egyptian royal DNA remains one of the most politically charged topics in archaeology. No full genome of this pharaoh has ever been published. His mummy has never been subjected to the kind of next-generation whole genome sequencing that was applied to the boy king's family in 2010. The technology exists. The mummy is well preserved. The petrous bone of the inner ear, the gold standard for ancient DNA extraction, is accessible. There is no technical barrier. The barrier is political. Any result, whatever it shows, will be seized upon by competing groups to advance claims about who the ancient Egyptians really were. Egyptian authorities have shown consistent reluctance to publish genetic data from the most famous royal mummies, preferring to control the narrative through selective release. The boy king's Y chromosome data was withheld for a decade. The full genetic profiles of the 18th dynasty royals have never been made publicly available for independent verification. And the pharaoh who built more monuments than any other, who ruled longer than any other, who fathered more children than any other, remains genetically untested in any publicly available study. His mummy lies in its climate-controlled case in the National Museum of Egyptian Civilization in Cairo, transferred there in 2021 in a televised procession watched by millions. 22 royal mummies were transported through the streets of Cairo on that night, each on a separate chariot-shaped vehicle, escorted by mounted cavalry and accompanied by orchestral music composed for the occasion. The route was lined with thousands of spectators. The event cost an estimated several $1 million. He was the centerpiece of the procession, the most famous name, the longest reign, the mummy that had once required a passport to fly to Paris. His face stares upward through the glass. His jaw is set, his hands are crossed, and 7 strands of red hair, documented by a French forensic scientist nearly 50 years ago, remain the most controversial physical detail ever recorded about any pharaoh. He ruled for 67 years. He built temples that still stand. He signed a peace treaty that is still cited. He was issued a passport 3,000 years after his death. And the one thing his mummy revealed that no one wanted to discuss was the color of his hair. His body has been moved more times than any other royal mummy in history, from his original tomb in the Valley of the Kings to at least 3 hiding places chosen by ancient priests, from a cliff cache to the Egyptian Museum, from the museum to a new national facility in 2021, transported in a televised golden procession watched by millions around the world. At every stage, people have decided what the world should know about him and what should remain hidden. The ancient priests hid his body to protect it from thieves. The modern authorities have hidden his DNA to protect it from politics. The full genome has never been published. The DNA remains untested. The question of who he really was, genetically, remains unanswered. For over a century, Egyptologists believed the question was settled. DNA says otherwise. Discovery continues. Thanks for watching. If this story stayed with you, subscribe and turn on notifications. We cover DNA mysteries, ancient forensics, and the cases history tried to forget.